to what you were saying about the women struggling with control and the men struggling with peace and unity. A woman who ends up in control gets overwhelmed, is miserable, becomes bitter.
Right here, folks. Welcome to the Rich Dawn, where eternal beatitude begins in this life. I'm Kyle Dean, and today I have with me Christine Webb, a loving wife, a librarian in the Western New York community, and also an avid member of young adult ministry. Christine and I have done a lot together to spread the love and joy of the gospel to those that we fellowship with in the region. Christine, it's so great to have you on today.
Yes, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see, what do we want to talk about today? I mean, we're going to focus on what it's like to be a librarian and a person of faith, and to make an impact in the community. And we have so many other things we can get into, but maybe we can start there. So
yeah, we can talk about I'm part-time, so what my day-to-day is, but some of my days
Nice.
as a librarian. So I am a public librarian with a children's focus. So I get to do story hours with children. Right now it's mostly pre-K down to toddlers. And it's in a public library setting. So I am serving the community. They're the ones who pay for libraries through their tax dollars. Even if you don't own property, you are paying your landlord, and your rent is going towards libraries, among many other services. So I have to give the community what they would like, but I also am Catholic, and I have ideas about what would be beneficial for children. Parents also are the primary educators, so I have to defer to them, and what the parents think they want to do to help educate their children.
Wow. So I just have to get it out of the way. How many drag queen story hours have you put on so far?
Womp womp. 0.
Good
But
for
also I believe that the library system here that I work for also has not gotten into that.
Yeah.
I think it's quite
politicize something that probably shouldn't be political.
Yeah, I think it's quite rare in general. So I think like the media does, and even faith-based media likes to talk about this because it's something that gets you riled up, and people want to talk about it because it's like, wow, that's terrible if this is really happening for very, very young children. But I think it's more rare than we think.
I really like what you just said, because obviously, I made light of it, but we're talking about something that pertains to something going on in the bedroom. And I think for pretty much since time immemorial, it was always generally agreed upon in, especially a chaste society, but just society in general in terms of norms, that there's certain things that you just don't even give oxygen. You know what I mean? Like, you don't even give it the time of day. And you just kind of alluded to that. Like, we just kind of don't even go there, And I think if more can get back to that baseline of what just comes natural to us, we'll practice what we preach here and just move right along. So when you take care of the younger people like that, how do you balance that in terms of like your own personal faith expression and also meeting, the desires of the community whenever they do express whatever they are?
Well, I think a lot of the time, when you, particularly I'm Roman Catholic, so in the Latin rite,
Sure.
We in the West tend to focus on like, am I evangelizing? Like, am I doing what I need to do? And like, am I reaching people? And like, we're so other focused. And the reason I brought up the West is because it appears to me in Eastern Catholicism that it's much more like personal holiness, and like there's a little bit more of like a laid backness to it, and they're not like, I'm proselytizing all the time. So I brought that up because with the very, very young children, when you do story hours, I've noticed a lot of the time it's just like it's very concrete things. So like the theme is going to be turtles, or like things that they can really grasp. So I really can't get out there and be like, oh, I'm doing catechesis of the Good Shepherd with the kids, because that takes a lot of, like, you have to have an atrium, and I'm actually not certified. I don't know that much about it, but like about catechesis of the Good Shepherd, but you have to have all these really concrete things for them to get this sense of the things unseen. And I have like 30-minute story hours, and we are going to have 2 books about some concrete subject, some puppets, some finger plays, like the Itsy Bitsy Spider is a finger play,
Nice.
and a craft at the end that is like, goes along with the theme. So it's much more like topics that are like the world around you. And so I guess like if we're talking about God, he created the world around us, and that's one of we have the scriptures, and then we have the revelation of the way that creation is. So this is still relevant to the soul's journey, but it's not something that secular society would see as a threat or as like, I'm really, really pushing something. And then let me bring up to our theme this last summer reading season, which just wrapped up, was All Together Now. And it was about like, how do you be a good friend, and like citizenship, and
Yes.
character building things. And like, these are things that I think we like to poo-poo secular society. Sometimes people get really focused on what's wrong, but there are a lot of things that are going well, and some of the things that are going well that we could learn from if we don't have them in our individual communities are be kind. Well, we might differ on what we think kindness is in certain situations, but I can read a story to a child about being kind and then have a concrete theme, like if it's about being courageous and standing up for people, maybe the theme is like, oh, lions, or my stuffed animal that is courageous and stands up for me, like some imagination components.
Sure.
So I think that's helpful. I also think that with imagination, this is really important to the Christian life. And doing fiction story hours and things like that are going to help children's sense of imagination. And you need imagination in order to engage in mental prayer sometimes. You can talk about this much more than I could. So like, you need to have this, like, you need to work on your imagination and your sense of wonder in order to relate to God. And so that like laying that kind of
nation prayer.
Okay, good. So laying that kind of groundwork for people who are like being raised by atheist parents or Muslim parents. I have a lot of Muslim kids actually, and all sorts of people in this particular community I'm serving. So
Awesome.
all kinds of families. So yeah, you just like lay that groundwork so that when they are searching for what is true and good and beautiful, they are equipped with the receptivity and capacity to test things and figure stuff out.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I'm hearing you lay down here is like, it's commonly attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, although I don't think we have any proof that he said it. But either way, it's still a truism, right? Like, preach the gospel, and when necessary, use words, right? Like, it's one of the things that I think, with the loud minority that's out there, and you mentioned the media that want to spin a narrative into a certain direction nowadays, like, it makes it seem like that's what everybody cares about, but it's just usually not. And everyone wants to be an activist. It seems like you don't need to be an activist to make a profound impact in the community, right? Like, you just by showing up and teaching the kids about, the animal kingdom, right? Like, overtly, there's, like you said, the seeds are being planted, and then of course the parents can then go and they can build on that later, right? Like, I'm Catholic, my wife and I have 3 kids. We might go to a story hour where you're providing that to the community and come home and expand upon, that animal kingdom. That's a part of God's creation, and God has a kingdom. You know what I mean? Like, there's always a way to further develop based on whatever anybody's proclivities are, whatever faith practice someone might have coming through the door.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So that's my day-to-day, and then the other, I guess more than 50% of my time, because I'm working like 19 hours a week, is spent at home, working on things for our home, but also working on, I'm getting people ready to be confirmed at our parish, so working on ministry for that and some other ministries at our parish.
That's awesome. Yeah, so let's get into that. So being a loving wife and then serve in the community. As a loving wife, I have to admit, I've had your husband on the show, and people recognize the last name, and he, there I referenced another podcast that he had been on recently called We Are the Easter People, and in there he actually he got into how the two of you had dated at one point, and you made clear to him, like, listen, I want us to be evenly yoked. There was a period where you both took a break, and he ended up finding himself, and it sounds like a lot of it had to do with seeds that you planted, and also got a chance to then water again when he came back into your life, and now you're in a very happy, loving marriage. I think that's such a cool, happy story. I don't know if you'd like to share a little bit about that. Like, what brought you to stick to your guns, so to speak? That's a very courageous thing to do.
Sure. So we met at 16 years old, working at summer camp on Dish Crew. It was a Christian summer camp, kind of in like the evangelical tradition. Nice. And then we started dating at the end of that summer, because you're not supposed to, if boys are blue and girls are pink or red, you don't make purple at camp. So and that's a rule for the campers and for the staff. So
follow the rules.
We waited until the end, and then we were dating. And when we came back years later, then it was like, oh, we were already together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes. So and camping ministry is wonderful, and we could talk about that too. But
sure.
Anyway, we met at 16. We started dating. We probably dated until I was 18. So and then we ended up breaking up in my sophomore year of college. I was like a youngling. I was 18 in my sophomore year. And I guess what happened was Brady was growing up in the Methodist Church, and I also had wonderful friends growing up who went to a Wesleyan church, but I don't think they were any particular denomination. And they showed me what it was like to be a Christian, even though I'm a cradle Catholic.
Right.
So they showed me what it was like to be a Christian in a different way, like a different type of Christian living, prayer, what ministry can look like, different ways of praying through music that were in their tradition. And they also were part of Young Life. I don't know if you know about Young Life, but that's like a youth group that's like across the nation. Okay. But it's much more, there's always like a Young Life leader who lives in your community, and then you go to camp with them in the summers, but you have like Bible studies all throughout the year and all this stuff.
Tradition, or?
It is, I think it's non-denominational.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I had like a wonderful foundation with that, but I was having trouble so I'm like coming alive as a Christian, attending Mass, and still doing all of the Catholic stuff that we have experienced in Western New York as part of our diocese in the past 30, 40 years. Sure. And I'm like having trouble figuring out how these go together. And if you talk to my mom, you'd be like, wow, this was such a like crazy time. She probably saw like, oh, this is like a crucial time, but like I'm like fighting. I would like come to her with Protestant apologetics for stuff, because I'm learning from Protestants, and I'd be like, why confession? And then she'd like went into the Bible that I had purchased for myself, and she like underlined like the passage, where and at the time I was like, how dare you go into my things, because I'm like a teenager.
Yeah, going through the angst.
Right. But she was just showing me like this is where Jesus gives the apostles the ability to forgive sins.
Right. And losing.
Yes. And whose sins you retain are retained, and whose sins you forgive are forgiven. At the same time, I always paid attention at during homilies, which I feel like I don't know why I was blessed with that, because so many of us, and I'm not going to say every time, but like so many of us, like we go into la la land very easily, and I still do this sometimes, but it like as a child I was always paying attention to the priest, so I'm like getting all this information, I'm like, I don't get it. And then at some point something just clicked where I realized I don't have to figure all of this out, like every single question, and like I don't have to, I should read the scriptures so that I'm not ignorant of Christ, but I don't need to go through and basically be my own theologian and do all the exegesis to figure it out. And that was like, Wow, that's so helpful. At the same time, one of my roommates in college who was a non-denominational Christian at the time offered me this book, and it was about, I guess, like the idea is like being sold out or surrendered to Jesus before you have a relationship with someone of the opposite sex. But it was for women in particular. So I was reading that and doing Bible study on my own, and I started praying the rosary every day, and I was taking the bus to one of our campuses that had daily mass, taking the bus early in the morning to go to daily mass.
You were on daily rosaries too back then?
I can't really...
Early college?
Yeah.
I mean, you were at least doing them. That's great.
Yeah. So this stuff was happening, and I realized that, like, I got called back to the Eucharist in a stronger sense of, like, okay, this is what's going on. So I felt like it would be really difficult for me if someone didn't, like, I was married to someone who didn't have the same understanding of the Eucharist as me, or who couldn't receive the Eucharist.
Got it.
So yes, so I guess that's part of it. So
those are the seeds that were planted.
Yeah, and I told Brady that I was like, yeah, you're kind of going this direction. He was kind of thinking about becoming like a praise music writer or a leader, like just like a big talent. Yeah, like a Christian musician for contemporary Christian music. And I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm going to mass, and so I just was like, I would prefer if we were on the same page, because even from the beginning at 16 we were like, okay, what is this about? Like, why are we dating? And it's like, because we are trying to figure out if we should get married. If, like, we at any point either of us doesn't want to marry the other person, or we didn't know for sure, then we should stop dating. So yeah.
Right. And that's cool, even though it was an evangelical setting, and obviously you're very devout about your faith, about expressing the Catholic expression, which uniquely cannot be called a denomination, right? Because to denominate is to it's kind of like to come from another. But we know as Catholics, we profess that this is the original church that Jesus Christ himself established. So that's, for our viewers and listeners, that might be tuning in from whatever proclivity you've come from, if we're seeking understanding about why this is so important to people, it's because the stakes are real, right? So it's cool that you had that, the Christian undertone was there right from the beginning, right, when you're 16. But then also you're developing in your faith life, and I think that's so cool that your friend gave you that book. I know there's Catholic versions of that, because my wife went through that as well, where it's like a Catholic altar call of sorts, like I'm going to maintain my purity, right, until I meet my spouse, or in whatever form that takes, right? Like, I'm going to surrender to you, God, now, as opposed to maybe whatever I've been exposed to in high school or whatever else. Mm-hmm. And so those are all really beautiful things. And then as time went on, he was going in another direction. And from what he shared in the other podcast, it sounds like there was a time when y'all took a break, but then he started reaching out to you with, like, all these questions about the Catholic faith. What was that like? Oh,
yeah. So I have to say, real quick, let me say this. I was really trying when we broke up, because we're married now, so I was still in love with him when we broke up. And it's a
happy ending.
Yes. But, now we can look back at hindsight's 2020.
Right.
But there's this song that was played at camp. Quite possibly Brady was even playing it for our, like, music ministry at camp. That says, "I lift a knife to the thing I love most, praying you'll come so that I can have both." And it's referencing Abraham and Isaac. Mm-hmm. That Abraham lifts the knife to sacrifice Isaac, as he's been asked to do, but he is prayerful and hopeful because he knows that God can even raise Isaac from the dead, and God has promised to give his blessing to Abraham's line through Isaac. So it's not like Isaac, even if Isaac dies in that moment, he would be raised from the dead, because God will keep his promises. So I heard this. I raise a knife to the thing I love most. I'm willing to give you everything, God. Praying you'll come and answer me so that I could have both, but you would still be primary, and then the thing I love most after that would be secondary. And I heard that, and I was like, I gotta break this off. So I was like, the whole time we were broken up, I was like, I really need to make this be final. Like, I really am giving this thing up, because this was kind of like the instruction I had received, this kind of mode. Yes. So the whole time I'm still like, I really still would like to be with Brady, but things really have to change for that to happen. And I have no idea how that is possible. Like, I can't convert him. I can't go out and do that. Like, Lord, I need you to help me. But I also was like, but I can't pray for that specifically because it's too grabby. So I was praying really hard for Brady to just become the man that he needed to be, because I was like, I don't know, Lord, like you're the one who's like the author of our stories here. So, right. And then there was this huge fruit of prayer where like I was talking to my mom about this, and I think she could see that I was, and my dad, and I think my mom could see that I was like suffering this a little bit, and she was going to daily mass at our parish at the time, our home parish, and I think she had everybody there praying for Brady. Wow. Because I brought this up recently, and I've become friends with one of the ladies there recently as an adult, and she was oh yeah, me and my family were praying about that, and I actually just ended up talking to her daughter, who's younger than me, recently, like, and becoming friends with her, sure. And she was like, oh yeah, I kind of remember praying for that, and I was like, yes. Not that like my business was everywhere.
No big deal.
Yeah, it's not like my mom was like spreading my business everywhere, but just like, hey, like, she wants prayers for this or whatever, you know.
And that's a really good point too, right? Like, if I may interject, as you're saying, two little PSAs, right? One, as somebody who's tried before, missionary dating doesn't tend to work. It can get very cringy really quickly, right? Like, you're trying to get somebody on the same page with you, and they may or may not be, you know, on board. That's like if you're still like dating, right? Like my heart goes out to anybody that's like married and then have found themselves in developing or evolving circumstances, right? So not to paint with too broad of strokes, but there is something to be said for the wisdom that was placed on your heart to make that clean cut, so to speak, and to let go and let God, right? Because we can't be in control, as you said. And then also, I like how you pointed out, right? There's a right way and a wrong way to get people involved in prayer petitions. I've seen people that like use prayer chains as a glorified way of gossiping, or you know, like don't share the details with people unless someone's giving you permission, or you know, or you can do it in a nebulous way. You know what I mean? And still get that prayer going. But overall, it sounds like, I mean, this is a testament to the power of vicarious prayer.
Yeah.
You gave it to God, and then He made good, huh?
Yeah, I didn't even know that was happening at the parish, so until years, like a little while later, and I was like, wow, okay, this is great. And so now, we're back at the same parish I grew up at now. So now there's people there. It just really like solidified my relationship with that community too, because now we come back and they're like, oh, this is the guy, and like I just feel like cared for, you know, in a way that I think sometimes people don't experience it because it's hard to be vulnerable and ask for prayer in the first place. So, but putting that aside, your original question was, Brady became more interested in Catholicism because someone was introduced into our lives the first year we were at camp, and he was a Messianic Jew at the time. He was like on a journey. He started out as in some kind of Christian tradition, but the year we met him, he was being a Messianic Jew, and then the next year when we saw him again, he was from out of state, so we didn't really see him until the next summer. He had become Catholic, and then Brady and I were still together at that time, but then we broke up shortly after, and then Brady and this friend spent a lot of time together over the next year just like talking about Catholicism, which I didn't know was happening because I had like been like, okay, I can't, it's not, I'd even be like, Mom, I kind of want to just get a hold of Brady, and she's like, it's not fair to him if you do that, you're the one who broke up with him. And so I'd be like, okay, and then I'd just like talk to God about it instead. Yes. So I didn't know this was going on. I was like letting him do whatever he was doing and then just praying for him. And over this year, he really just like received a lot of apologetics from this friend. And then he started going to RCIA, and we had wonderful holy priest who was actually doing the RCIA. I know sometimes it's lay people, and that's awesome too, but it's nice to have the pastor on the team. And then he did start sending me like apologetics questions at some point as part of his journey, and I was like, it was like on Facebook Messenger, because I was like, I'm just waiting for him and like see what and then he like would send me stuff, and I'd be like,
what was the first one like?
I feel like
we were like,
I don't remember now. I think it was about Mary though.
You had to be like, oh man, this is the first time I'm hearing from him. Oh, he's talking about the faith, which is exactly like the prayer that you had.
Yeah.
They had to be.
Oh wait, no. This was weird. Before that happened, I took a year off from camp because obviously Brady was there, and I was like, I don't know.
Oh,
yeah.
I know, it's tough.
So I took a year off from camp, but then I had friends who were still serving, and they would get like 24 hours off on the weekend to attend church and like do some other stuff and get set before the next set of kids would come. And they were like, hey, we think it would be really cool if we could come to your house, or have the staff come for a weekend away. And like hilariously, my parents were out of town that day, but I asked them about it, and they were like, sure. And then like 30 like Christian like young adults and teens came over and used our pool and whatever. So Brady was there, and I ended up talking with him, and I feel like our friends, there was a guy and a girl who also were Catholic. I feel like they were, I feel like they were, but like in a wonderful way, not like also a creepy way. The wrong way to do yes, that. Like just like prayer chains. Right. So we had talked briefly, and then we went to mass together, and he was like, oh wow, like I have to say, he said something afterward like, oh, I didn't know that you were this like you're so much more involved in like specifically Catholic Christianity now. Sure, than before and intentional. So he like admired that, I guess. So I was like, okay, there's definitely still something there, so I need to be careful. And then after that, he felt comfortable sending me the Facebook message about like asking about Mary, and and I was like, I don't really know how to answer your question. I'm just going to send you stuff from the catechism about it.
Boom.
Yeah.
Simple, effective.
Again, I'm like, Mom, what do I do? I was like 19, right? And I was still like at home, and I was like, Mom, Brady's sending me messages. I don't know how to answer. And she was like, just send him stuff from the catechism. So if you don't know. And I was like, that's great. And my mom is like also a cradle Catholic. And she grew up at a time that the Baltimore Catechism was probably relevant, so she was like, yeah, boom, go back to the catechism.
It should always remain relevant.
Yeah.
In any event, that's another subject, right? Well, that's incredible. So, and obviously, God was working through all of these little interactions, and actual graces were taking place, and you're together. You came back together, focused on your Catholic faith, right? And got married in the church. And, I mean, there's so much to be said for, the value that you've added to the community, right? You've mentioned how you're involved in the life of your parish. If people want to check out that episode with Brady after this, if you haven't yet, you can also see how Brady's been a director of religious education multiple times, and so you both have experienced a lot about what it takes to contribute to the life of a community. And also, by the way, it's really beautiful how you feel supported by your fellow parishioners. So what would you say it was like experiencing the other side of that pendulum swing, right? Like going in the direction of, okay, we're on the same page now, and adding value to those you love.
Yeah. So he asked me to be his sponsor when he became Catholic, because our friend was out of state, and he felt like it would be kind of like, he would have to come all the way over here for that, which he would have done in a heartbeat, but Brady was not sure at the time. And I was like, well, okay. But we weren't dating, and I was like, that if like we do start dating and then things go south, like that would be bad, because then your sponsor would not be in your life. And he was like, it's okay. And I was like, all right, so let's do this. So
did you work out like an agreement? I'll still be your sponsor, but I'm never talking to you again after Easter, or no?
Yeah, so I was like, I'm getting excited. Like, I can see that like he's becoming Catholic, but I'm still like tapping the brakes. And also I was like, maybe I need to discern religious life, which was very short-lived for me, the discernment, because I talked to a sister in passing at it was actually one of the Sisters of Life, and she in passing at the Students for Life of America conference, they were like tabling, and I talked to her and I was like, yeah, I think I need to like discern religious life. And then I don't even know, it was like a 5-minute conversation tops, and I don't even know how she got this incisive, but she must have been given like gifts from the Holy Spirit or something.
Sisters.
Yeah. And she was like, I said, this is going on with my ex-boyfriend, and I'm really afraid because I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, I just, I'm going to be a sponsor. I don't know what's happening. And she was like, if you're afraid of marriage, you need to discern what's going on there before you can discern religious life. Mm-hmm. Because you cannot, if there's fear, you got to deal with it, because otherwise it would be like running. I mean, it's like what happens in The Sound of Music. Like, Maria is afraid of like what she's feeling for Captain Von Trapp, and then she like tries to go back to become a sister, and then the Mother Superior is like, you can't run to the convent because you're afraid of marriage, like if that's what your call is, or like if you're called to be a priest or a celibate of any kind, you can't run away from that and try to be married, because then you're like, it's just going to be broken, Not
to mention, whenever, yes, of course, objectively speaking, the call to the religious life and or the priesthood is a higher calling, but you need to have the fundamentals of what it takes to be a good husband or wife intact, right? As a prerequisite to then sacrifice that on the altar. Like, if you could become a priest, like for a man to become a priest, like, you're sacrificing your earthly fatherhood on the altar to become a spiritual father. Of course, in the West, where you're celibate and you don't get married, to be the father of all of these different families. You need to know what it's like to be, you need to like have an appreciation for and the psychological comportment of being, a good earthly father, to be able to give of yourself in that way. And the same with the religious life, right? Mm-hmm. So that's very sage wisdom. And like you said, you don't want to do something as a means of avoidance. Yeah. You should be doing something for the sake of doing the thing.
Yeah, I had no idea that that's what I was doing either. Wow. And I must have, like, maybe it was obvious because I was just like young and just starting this, and she was like a vocations vocations person, right? Yes. Director for their, sure. But yeah.
Well, and it's a very personal thing, what you might have been wrestling with about marriage, so I'm not going to ask you to share of that unless you want to, but obviously that was another big seed planted.
Yeah. So and then we ended up being we started dating again, and we were dating for a little while, but we both like basically knew we were going to get married at that point. And it just felt like we dated from 16 to 18 years old, and then like 20 to 22-ish again, and then we were engaged for like a year and a half. So it was like a long time. And I mean, we got married at 23 years old. So
You're still quite young for today's standards.
Which, that was like part of the deal of like, this is like a really long process. We met each other at 16, and like we had to wait that long. Like, we ended up waiting that long, which I don't know if I would recommend that in general. But the journey was, I mean, there's always blessings and graces, even if you are, and we were a distance, which really helped. I think it would be a very different story if we were not a distance couple. We probably wouldn't have been able to like just be dating for that long.
Well, because you had different threads running too, right?
Yeah.
God's doing his work, aligning your belief systems to be evenly yoked. Right, and so it's what was meant for your story, and you dodged a bullet in the sense of, we know that there's the scripture, the New Testament passages all about like the wife who has an unbelieving husband, and it's not quite on that level if it's like non-Catholic Christian versus Catholic versus the other varieties that are out there, but like being in a position where you want to serve your husband, but you also want him to convert, and that there can be a lot of suffering that goes with that.
Yeah, and it's a huge temptation too with women and men have different types of sins that they generally are like pulled towards.
Sure.
And also like in their relationship with each other. So like women part of their covenant curse that was like once the original sin happened with Adam and Eve,
right.
One of the covenant curses was like that Eve would basically be trying to like, there's like a power struggle now between Adam, control, which like it's a hard enough time as it is, but if you like are part of if you think that you're right with your religion and your husband thinks that he's right with his religion, how much more difficult will that power struggle be as opposed to like more mundane things? But like, of course, it's always a struggle, but like I think it's harder when it's these like very important truths that are really at the base of all existence.
You heard it here, folks, from a woman of faith. It's so true. And again, we're not going to devolve into comparing this genuine struggle that everyday people go through with the loud minority that's trying to throw these different frequencies out there at us. But you make an outstanding point that in our faith tradition, we believe that due to the fall with original sin and Adam and Eve, that there was like you mentioned what the woman took on in terms of her struggle, and of course what the men take on for their struggle is what's called pusillanimity, classically understood, which just means cowardice essentially. And because look at what Adam did, right? Like he allowed Eve to fall to the temptation, right? Sometimes we get this idea that Adam was like off around the corner of the trees, and that the event with Eve and the devil, disguised as a serpent, happened, and then he came later. No, he was there. He allowed it to happen, which was a failure on his part to provide and to protect and to guard, and then also to blame it on his wife, right? Like those are acts of cowardice. Mm-hmm. So that's what men struggle with. Women struggle with maybe control, and of course, there's a hierarchy to an orderly relationship, and particularly when you're talking about a couple. So yeah, it's just a lot easier not to have extra dynamics tugging at that.
And I mean, and for the people who do, I've seen really, really good marriages that are not there. If they're not on the same page about religion, they still work together. It's just harder, I guess. Like it's just that there's different focuses in these different marriages that like I don't know. I was young enough and not attached already to somebody, so it's like helpful to like figure out what you want that early. But if you don't, and then things change over time, or somebody has a conversion experience in the middle of the marriage, you've promised yourself into the future with this person before God, so like you still have to make it work. And It just means that this is one of the areas that your marriage will either shine or be tarnished. Like it's like one of the cross areas or the crucial areas for your marriage. So you can either show people like a wonderful way of existing, and your marriage can be like a beacon, or it can be kind of a drain, I guess. So everyone has those different areas, and each relationship, not just marriage, but each relationship has it too. So
right. And conversion is a lifelong struggle. I mean, we're constantly learning how to be the best version of ourselves every single day. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to have couples that weren't even thinking about religion at all when they came together, of course that's not going to be a main focus for them. But I think especially when you realize that when all is said and done, we're all going to die. I mean, there's a kind of like an urgency that ought to come with that in terms of like, what does that mean? What implication is that going to have? I mean, you can only distract yourself with whatever your day-to-day hobbies or passions or interests or whatever might have, a pull on you if you have attachments, or if you don't, right? Maybe you're a deeply spiritual person but not religious, and you strive for detachment of some sort under some philosophical tradition. But either way, all of that's going to go away at some point. You know what I mean? You're going to die, and something's going to come after. And so, matters of faith and matters of, just the transcendentals, I guess, ought to come to the forefront in people's lives. And hopefully, if you're raised right, or if you've raised, it sounds like you have, I don't know if your mom's like a clinician or not, but she certainly sounds like she has the operative gift of counsel from the Holy Spirit, big time. right? Like, it's really, really helpful when you have those supports from your family, because that's, that's how it should be, right? Parents should be the first line of defense and offense, and raising a kid to be able to find themselves and to live out what God created them for.
Yeah. Let me go back to what you were saying about the women struggling with control and the men struggling with pusillanimity.
Sure.
Those things feed into each other, which is really sad. Like, it's really sad that it's like, okay, women feel like, I mean, we could start at either end, but like women feel like they need to take control because their husbands have kind of abdicated responsibility, or like abdicated the headship or kingship or whatever office in the family.
Right.
So women feel like they need to take control, but they also like, so the if they hold back from that, knowing that like, oh, I shouldn't be controlling, but the man is also not in the throne. There's no one in the throne. Like, and then the men also feel like, okay, well, my wife is trying to, is doing something, I should like stand back and let her do it. So like they feed into each other.
Yep.
And it's like, that's hard. That's a really hard struggle. So I'm not like making light of either of those things, because it's just something that we have to try to overcome and deal with. And yeah.
And I could speak on behalf of men, and which, by the way, this is really cool how this conversation is organically developed, because one thing we haven't shared with our viewers and listeners yet, Christine, is, as anybody who's tuned into my show with regularity knows, I'm a ministry leader, and we've been involved with that. I alluded to that in the episode introduction, but specifically the Dynamis ministry here in Western New York, and you've been tremendous. Like, over the years, with women's nights, and we come together, the men and women, sometimes with the co-ed nights, to take what we've learned, really the meat of the faith, and to balance equal parts joy and seriousness, right? Taking our faith seriously, which is something that has been instilled in you from your youth, which is great. And, we've had some of these conversations, right? The men and the women have had opportunities to kind of wrestle with these very real challenges that we all have. And sometimes it just starts with having the courage to have the conversation, right? Because somehow we found ourselves in this 21st century to a point where these are like super countercultural ideas. And I don't know why. I mean, they're super basic if you think about it.
Yeah.
Like, if we're being authentic and honest with ourselves and each other, right? So I can speak on behalf of the men when I say, it's challenging to put a woman through that situation, because she is going to try to make right by things if she's going to try to take over that headship. But it's a double-edged sword, guys, because if you do just want to go along to get along and let her run things or whatever, simultaneously what tends to happen, and I've heard this countless times from multiple women of faith, the woman is just not going to respect that man.
Yeah. It's easy to get super bitter in that situation where a woman, I have to say this from my perspective because I don't want to say this for everyone, but I think it's true. A woman who ends up in control gets overwhelmed, is miserable, becomes bitter. It's just not, we're not really wired for all of those pressures all the time, plus what we should be doing on top of it. So we see this also with just that women are doing, if they're married and have children, they're doing all the stuff that is traditionally expected, and they're working full time. And it's what? Why? Or yeah, just that they're doing the work of 2 to 3 people sometimes, and now in our current situation, and that it wasn't always the case, and we might figure out a way back from that, such that women can work if they need to, because there are tons of situations where they need to, or they need to work somewhat but not full time, or they need to whatever, right. Or they need to work at this part of their life but not that part of their life, or whatever, where they are allowed to, and there's a space for them in the community, or the community is supporting them when they need help financially or otherwise.
Yes,
but
spiritual and corporal works of mercy.
But we're not required to work in order to live, because now we're seeing, basically people feel like they have to have 2-income families all the time.
Well,
yeah.
We've gotten into this in some of our group discussions, and I guess we'll get into it shed a spotlight on this issue. And it's not a political issue, and it's not even really a religious issue. It's more of like a natural law thing. But the Catholic Church has weighed in on this, right? Especially in the 1800s, she did a lot of encyclical producing based on, the natural law and family life and community, right? Because community begins with the family. The family is the nucleus of society. It's the building block of society. The Church has taught that from the beginning. That's not a new concept. And I exhort people, anybody who has an interest in these kinds of topics. Pius IX, Blessed Pius IX got into this big. Leo XIII got into this big. You could look at Casti Connubii. You could look at Rerum Novarum, and learn about some of these things. And the Church has made clear, like, when and this is based on the natural law. It's not even a divine law thing, but when you're rearing small children, the woman ought to be at home with them. Now we're talking countercultural, right? I mean, we went there, right? And whatever, call me bigot if you want, but all I'm doing is I'm saying this is what the Church has always said. And there's, I think, a genius to that, right? Because in season and out of season, we preach the gospel. And if the Church said that in the context that she did, and I'm telling you as somebody who's theologically trained, it's natural law considerations don't change with custom. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just something. It's interesting to think about, and we've had conversations offline about how we got here. Right? There was World War II happened. You needed women in the workplace a lot more. Men were off dying. I mean, things definitely. There've been imbalances over time. We could talk about the Industrial Revolution before that, but like you said, if people want to have the option, they ought to be able to. And unfortunately, in this day and age, that's even becoming harder. Mm-hmm. Harder than ever, because it's like you need two incomes to survive.
Yeah.
So how do we, I don't know, how do we get here? How do we fix it? What do you think?
There would probably someone else has said this way better. In fact, I'm sure they have. So you can comment if you have something that we should consider in the future. But I would say that second wave feminism, where women were, there was like this weird point in time with the boom in the U.S. with the kind of like at the time the baby boom was happening, where one income was enough. There was like lots of mass-produced things that were suddenly cheaper, things that were labor-saving, like washing machine innovations, stuff like that, labor-saving for women. And then children simultaneously were being shipped off to school for most of your day. So what am I doing at home? My children are in school. I am getting myself ready to look good for when my husband comes home, and that's it. And I'm throwing stuff in the... That's reductionist, but it's like a lot less work was going on, but it was like for a smidgen of time. But then all these women felt unfulfilled. They were like, there must be more. So then the answer that was given in second wave feminism was like, go to school. Okay, great. The Catholic Church loves education. We should all be educated because to be good humans, like we need philosophy. We need to know what we need to do critical thinking so we know what we think. These big questions we talked about a little while ago.
Sure.
Obviously you need education, but when it was like education so that I can then go work, like education into like pointing towards workforce, that's where things got messed up, because then it was like, okay, I need to go work to be fulfilled, and then suddenly you have this influx of people into the workforce that are actually driving down the cost of labor. And now we're in a situation where people who want to get out of the workforce can't, because there's not enough income with just one adult working in the family. So I think that's kind of what happened. I'm not sure how to get out of it, but I think maybe just commit to having a lower standard of living, because it's still possible to survive off of one smaller income.
Well, and in practicality, that's what a lot of families that want to maintain the traditional natural law focus are doing, is they're making tremendous sacrifices and they're living in poverty. But that's not all bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the fruit of the third joyful mystery, the nativity, is the spirit of poverty. So we do it, it's not destitution, you know, we do it lovingly for our families. And so, yeah, and that's, you know, a testament to the beauty and the joy of sacrifice. But yeah, I mean, there's so much more that could be said on this. And like you said, that people could say things way better than how I'm throwing it down too, because I endeavor not to get into politics. It's just not that interesting to me. But there certainly are forces out there that have, if not driven the trajectory that we're on now, they've certainly capitalized on different events that have happened throughout history. And you know, there's certain agencies that wanted to start taxing the other half of the populace and simultaneously have much more control over what kind of education the children are getting. Which, you know, in the context of what Holy Mother Church in her infinite wisdom has exhorted us all in terms of stick with the natural law, is unfortunate. You know, and there will be a reckoning for that. When all is said and done, everything is accounted for, and everybody will be held responsible for their role in all of this.
And let me say too, when you talk about natural law, and like these in general are the principles, and this is what the church says. The church is instructing everyone for all time. Like these things are like across all of human history because it has to do with the natural law, and those things don't change across time.
Right. It's not like customs or disciplines.
So with that, we'll say, okay, when you're addressing everyone who's ever existed, you have to give like, this is the ideal, this is the standard, this is what we want, like this is kind of like a general principle, and then each individual couple needs to figure out what works. So we want to say like, and I think we're getting into some issues in our culture right now where people are like, I don't do this, and therefore I don't feel like, I don't feel particularly feminine in this way, and therefore am I a woman? Like there's this kind of stuff going on.
There is?
Yes.
That's terrible.
I know, it's very confusing for people. So
they better never do that in our libraries.
So I would say like, and like we could talk about this with like marriages and romantic relationships between a man and a woman, that like you should think about what is this like overarching principle and ideal with like we can talk about like the division of labor or gender roles or whatever.
Sure.
Try it out, because most of the time this is how stuff skews between the man and the woman.
Sure.
Try it out. You will figure out over time in your marriage what works. And hopefully you've discerned that your spouse is also long-suffering and that you can work on that, so that when stuff doesn't work according to the ideal, you can be like, okay, what are we doing? What can we fix here?
And
like I've heard about like there's marriages where the husband does more of the inside work and the wife does more of the outside work because she's much better at balancing on a ladder and she doesn't want her husband to die. Like, you know what I mean? Stuff like that. So it's not like, or the wife does more of the finances and the husband does like more of the physical housework or something like that.
So you're saying that adhering to the natural law doesn't make you some stodgy, like rigid, like holding people down because you feel like there's one super specific way everything has to happen, and if you're not doing that, you're not Catholic. Like,
right.
I appreciate you bringing that point to light, because it's, of course, in the day and age we live in now, it's unfortunate that, and it's a great soundbite, right, for people to just like try to demonize what used to, like I mentioned earlier about, mentioning matters of the 6th or 9th commandment or things that take place in the bedroom. Like, it's just, you don't even give it oxygen to get into that in a public manner. You know what I mean? Because it's not there's a lack of decorum that goes with that. So too, like when we're having these conversations, people can try to twist it out of context, but it's just a matter of like, there's parameters, stick within the natural law parameters, but there's also there's like a plurality of individual expression that's in there.
Yeah. Just like there's a lot of different ways that and this is important in like parish life or whatever community you're part of, even if you're not like a religious person. You need to find a community where there are people, you're around a lot of different families and marriages that you look at and you say, hey, that works, because you need to see examples of different different marriages, different ways of doing things. If you are religious, you need to be around different Christians who, like, you need to make sure your kids are around Christians who have different charisms. Like, if you're part of a parish, this is just probably happening naturally, but they need to see not just your marriage, but other people's marriages. They need to see not just your way of prayer, but they need to see how other people pray, because they, we were kind of talking about this earlier. When you receive a child, they're a blessing, but they also can be like a completely different personality from you. Oh, yeah. And you have to, and you're trying to figure it out, right? And you kind of touched on this with, like, when you said my mom has the gift of counsel, like, that she was like trying to like help me as I am and as my personality was interacting with my circumstances, and it might not have been what she was used to, So like, you need to make sure your children have the ability to be around people who show them different ways that they can be faithful to what they're given. And yeah, like, there's this plurality of not just marriages, but also just like in your individual walk with God.
Amen. So, well, let's close with this. And, you're welcome back on any time. We have so much more that we can get into, but to the point that you just brought up, towing that line between you kind of need to put yourself out there in the community so that people have a model to look after. People, like, there's got to be standard bearers, right? And we know this because look at the original model of apostleship that our Lord passed on, right? It's literally inherent in our DNA that, the what's so beautiful about the apostleship model is it's really grassroots. It's really it's like an apprenticeship model, right? Versus something more top down or something much more corporate. But you want to do it without being gimmicky, right? Like, how do you toe that line of authenticity? And, obviously, I mean, my 2 cents on it is, if you're just being who God called you to be, then it's not really about you, even though it's your example that people are seeing. Mm-hmm. But what would you say, like, how does one toe that line?
That is a tough question. Let me just
fuel up.
I think you have to be aware that where the boundaries of acceptable, that sounds so like aggressive, but anyway, like acceptable expression of like, this is the Christian thing. The church is huge. Like, it's kind of amazing in how many ways outside of the church we've found, but it also isn't because of original sin. But like, sure. It's huge. Like, there's so many doorways in. Mary's running around with keys. Mary, the Mother of God, is running around with keys, letting everybody in through all these different avenues. She's appearing, like all this stuff. It's like so huge, but you still need to know where the end of it is. Like, if I go into this realm, then I'm off the ark. I'm off the bark of Peter. Like, I'm not in the church anymore. This is not what God wants. So if you are aware of like all this stuff in here, I don't need to do all of it, but these are all like legit. So when I see someone, like, I'm expressing my charism, or like the way that someone interacts with me as a Christian, like, this is my charism, and I'm excited about it, and like, that attracts people, but like, I'm not like, and you also have to do this.
Right.
So, and then
bridge too far.
So like, I need to be aware that there's like other ways to be, or like that's not necessarily going to be helpful for every single person. But if I'm just excited about it, and I share, hey, this is something I'm excited about, but not like, you must also do that. Hey, you really need to go on this retreat. It was life-changing for me. Or my friend asked me about, he wants to get a Bible for his friend. And he was like, where can I go to look at Bibles? And I was like, this is the one I used, and it was like super amazing for me in college. But if you want to go look at some in person and just like peruse, like, here's 5 stores in the area. Like, I know that like, he's not even Catholic, so I'm like, like, this was super cool because there's notes in this Bible, and it's like a really important part of my story, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be so for you. And then I guess with regard to the term gimmick, we can get really trapped in like thinking, how can I get somebody to come to church, how can I get them to come, like, and then it becomes about
stats.
Yeah, and it becomes about, and you can feel that, like, it's not just that kids, like, people say that kids can smell inauthenticity, or like the dogs can smell fear, like, you know, it's just like they can tell when you are faking it, but like so can everyone else. It's not just kids. So when you're like I don't know, inviting somebody to church and it's like, hey, like we have a laser show and that's like what's gonna get people to come in here, but like that's not even what you're about, man. Like you need to stick to what the truth is, and be yourself, and like not get sidetracked on these things that are you're probably not even doing them well, and you're not going to keep up with the culture either. Like, I don't know, if I'm trying to sing like Adele, but sing Christian songs, like Adele is already kind of like,
have a darn good voice.
Yes, and Adele is already like, by the time I'm like up to that, like I'm spending so much time to do this and write all these songs. By the time I'm there, like she's already, like they've moved on. They're somewhere else. Like
she already came out with 25. I don't know if everybody's excited for 32 or whatever.
Yeah, so I mean, like, she's still doing her thing, which is great, but like it feels like the culture, like it moves on at such a rapid pace. So like if you're trying to like use the culture to like bring people into something that's ancient, like one, is not going to translate very well. Two, like the culture is going to surpass you before you even do anything with it.
I love that.
So, and people can feel it. They can feel like they feel like they're being pandered to. Yes. And they feel like they went in and like there's a used car salesman like trying to be like, you need Jesus, and I'm like, well, why don't you just be
my friend,
just be yourself.
Yeah Be there for me even after I make the jump. Are you just gonna move on to the next person you need to go convert?
The conversion is a lot about, or just evangelization is a lot about just like having actual real friendships with people, and it's something we can talk about that next time. Friendship in our culture and what we need to save it, because we're getting very isolated these days.
Absolutely. And from what you just said, I mean, what I'm hearing is, you know, first of all, just throw this out for any of the theologians, like we have what's called the fides qua versus the fides que, right? And you need both. Right? The fides qua is your own subjective personal faith experience. That's where a lot of that plurality can come in. But you also need to be well grounded, like your conscience, for example, to the fides que, this objective faith expression. And if you're lacking in any of that, it's going to be awkward, right? Because you might push something that's okay, that works for you, but that doesn't fall under the fides que. So everybody else doesn't need to do the things the way you did it. And so what I'm hearing you say is, formation has a big, factor in that. Being properly formed enough to, within what's realistic in your state in life, right? To know the differences or the boundaries and to try to be, respectful of that. And then that brings me to the second thing, like, just to put a pin on it, and there's so many more we could bring up, but just kindness, right? Like, being excited and, all those different things that make it naturally attractive and beautiful, like you said, is great. But some of the most basic things like kindness will drive it, right? And that comes with authenticity, right? So you can't, like, if you're going to try to tell people this is the right way to do it, kindness can go out the door really quickly.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Christine, it's been great chatting with you. Thank you so much for coming on. And, I just really look forward to seeing what you can do in the local faith community at your local library. We'll be sure to get our family out there. Thank you so much for your services and for really sharing, too, of yourself with everything that you and your husband are doing to impact your local church, right? That's where it starts. Mm-hmm. I mean, it starts in the family. And then adding value to our community, right? And that's the whole point of this movement. So thank you so much again for your insights. Are there any parting words that you want to share about, like, what you got going on, or famous last words?
Yes. So, just make sure that you are kind and that you listen to people. And I'm going to quote this. This is what one of my friends told me. I'm pretty sure it's from a particular movement in the Catholic Church, like a retreat movement. But their motto is make a friend, be a friend, bring that friend to Christ. And, you know, it might be like only ever so slightly are you involved in their journey, but just being a friend with them and not pushing them super hard, but just sharing of yourself and let them share with you.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you again, Christine. Mm-hmm. And if you enjoyed content like this, if you got any value out of this episode, please hit that subscribe button. It's the way for us to get more of this wholesome content out to the masses. And you can go to kyledeangorlick.com if you'd like to learn more about what I have going on in the life of the community. We've got the Rich Dawn show on there. We've also got theological master's works that are coming up, interviews with more directors of religious education. We got priests lined up and so much more going on. So I just thank you so much for all of your support, and God bless you.